Grace Mitchel. She's Fulbright professor, and she's going to tell you about American youth movements and mutual aid. Welcome, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Grace. I will be talking about youth movements and mutual aid today, and then we have an activity at the end. So I hope that you all learn something, and then we can learn from each other at the end and discuss. So I will do my best to explain all the information, but if anyone has any questions during the presentation, you can just raise your hand and I would be happy to answer them, or if there's something you don't understand. So, okay, thank you so much for being here. We can get started. Okay, what is a youth movement? So I thought I should define it before we got much further, because I'm going to talk about a few different youth movements that have happened in America, past and present, and also a movement I was involved in. But first, a youth movement is a political, religious, or social movement or agitation led by or consisting chiefly of youth or young people, and usually aiming at reform or revolution. So this is from the dictionary, but in much simpler terms, it's just any cause or movement that young people get involved in because they want to see change in the world. They want to see change in their own community, country, or on a global scale. So I am going to start by talking about a really important youth movement in American history that you may have heard of parts of it, and I will do my best. I'm not a historian, but I think it's important context. Okay, so in 1960, there was a very famous youth demonstration. 4 university students your age sat at a lunch counter, so like a stolovaya, in the American South in North Carolina, in Greensboro, North Carolina. These university students were black, they were African Americans, and they wanted to be able to eat lunch at this lunch counter. And in that time in America, we still had segregation. So they weren't allowed to be eating at that stolovaya. So they refused to get up. They sat there continuously to make a statement to say that they deserved to be able to eat lunch there as well. And this started a much bigger movement. This is part of the civil rights movement and that era. So for each movement I talk about, I'm going to describe the problem, goal, strategies, and outcome. So this is a good framework because we will use something like this when we think about the movements that we might want to start at the end. So the problem. Segregation was an unjust, racist system that kept black and white Americans separated. The goal of these 4 young people was desegregation of lunch counters. They had a specific goal. Of course, they wanted to end this racist system, but that day their goal was to eat lunch at a restaurant that they weren't allowed to eat at. The strategies. So their strategy was direct action, which means instead of just talking about something, you get out on the street and you do it. So they did a sit-in at the lunch counter February 1st of 1960. Eventually 300 other people joined them in support at this single stolovaya. And then eventually that summer, they started a movement of sit-ins at lunch counters across the South in America, and 50 other cities also by that summer had sit-ins. So sit-in, I'm using it as a noun, but it literally means like to sit in a place and refuse to leave. And it's a strategy, it's a peaceful demonstration strategy that's been used by many different movements to attract attention to their cause. So the outcome, many lunch counters were desegregated. That means that they were then required to serve all people who wanted to eat there, black, white, or other races. And then they actually formed another group which went on and was very important in the American Civil Rights Movement, called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. You may have heard of Martin Luther King Jr. he was also like an ally to this group and doing organizing with them as well. So they coordinated more sit-ins, and eventually they helped with freedom rides and in voter registration. So their direct action was sitting at this lunch counter in 1960, but it led to a much bigger movement. Okay, so I just wanted to start here. It's not the first youth movement or the last, but it's a very important one in American history. Okay, so then we can talk about a few current youth movements in the United States. This one is called the Sunrise Movement. So this was started in April 2017. A group of youth activists came together who were very frustrated about climate change or global warming, and they said enough is enough. The earth belongs to all of us, and what the older generation does now will affect us and our children. You're borrowing our future from us, and this isn't fair. And so this youth activism group, they identified a problem. The problem was pretty big. It was climate change, but then they broke it down into steps that they could manage as a movement. So overall, their goal was is still to stop climate change. To do this, they focused on electoral politics in the United States. Specifically, they wanted to end the influence of fossil fuel executives. So fossil fuel is like oil and gas, and these executives have a lot of influence on politics in America, actually all over the world. So they wanted to make the politics reflect the interests of voters instead of rich oil companies. They also focused on electing climate-focused leaders, so senators and representatives who would focus on climate change. Their strategies. There was a very large movement in 2018, I think it's been repeated since, called a climate strike, where people refused to go to school, to university, to work, and they did a strike, which means you don't work, you don't do anything that day, to raise awareness for climate change. And they had signs and a lot of press coverage. They had other acts of civil disobedience, which means like peaceful demonstrations that get people's attentions. So there was sit-ins as well, just like the last slide. They went to like Parliament building, well, not Parliament, but like the state legislatures, and they sat on the steps. They actually also like went to the offices of politicians, and they sat and refused to move until they had the opportunity to talk about this issue. They also did a lot of campaigning for candidates that they supported. So young people, even people who couldn't vote yet, in America you can vote when you're 18, but some 16, 15-year-olds also were involved to help encourage other people to vote. As an outcome, they elected many senators that they were campaigning for that care about climate change, and they're still advocating for greater progress now. Okay, so that's the Sunrise Movement. This one's about climate change, and it affects the whole world, but this is in America. Okay, another youth movement with a totally different focus. It's called United We Dream, and this is a movement to support immigration causes in America. So this is a group that has actually been around for about 10 years already, maybe even longer, and their focus is to support undocumented people in America. So their problem, undocumented people in America face discrimination and the threat of deportation. So when I say undocumented, it means anyone who's living in a country where they don't have a legal papers or legal residency. They came to America for many different reasons, but the thing that they have in common is that they are not citizens yet. And deportation, it would be when an illegal, or a person who is considered to be there illegally is required to leave the country. This is deportation. So the goal of United We Dream was they identified their goal as building power to create an immigrant youth movement that can protect and advocate for undocumented youth. So they're really focused on young people, and this is an interesting part of the immigration debate in America, because many people who came to America came as children. Their parents brought them, and they didn't have any say, or they didn't make the decision for themselves. They were brought as children. They grew up, and often they didn't even know that they were living undocumented until they were already teenagers, and they did something like try to get their driver's license, and they said, oh, I need my birth certificate, or I need, so-and-so, and then their parents say to them, no, you can't, you actually are not living here legally, and this begins a lot of problems. It's very difficult for them to attend university, to get a legal job, and so this activism community all rallied around undocumented youth to support them. Their strategies, like the other two movements, were direct action. So walkouts, that would be a walkout is when everybody leaves like a university or a workplace all at the same time, kind of like a strike. But usually you come in the middle, you're already there, and then you all walk out. Marches, sit-ins, and political advocacy. So specifically advocating for legislation that can help undocumented youth in America. So their outcome, under former President Obama, a really important piece of legislation was passed, and it's been challenged in the courts, but it's been upheld. We don't have to get too far into the details, but it's called DACA, Deferred Action, I forgot what the C was, but it's specifically preventing the deportation of American youth. Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Yes, thank you. Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So just like Heather just said, it's specifically to help people. They may be adults now, but they arrived as children. And of course, children don't decide to immigrate, but they're brought along or sent on their own. Okay. All right, so another movement, again, a totally different issue. It's called March for Our Lives. So this is a movement that began in 2018. February 14th, 2018, there was a school shooting in Florida, in Parkland, Florida. And it was at a high school. It was a really terrible tragedy. Some young people lost their lives, and other students who had been at the high school when this tragedy happened were very inspired to make a change because they were so frustrated to see what had happened in their own community, and then to hear people on the news say, oh, yeah, thoughts and prayers, I hope it doesn't happen again. And they said, no, enough is enough. We're going to make a change now because our lives depend on it. So the problem they identified was gun violence. This is pretty specific to America. Everyone has different political views about it in America, but just neutrally, it's a pretty neutral statement to say that gun violence is an issue in America. So their goal, this is a quote from their website, they want to create safe and healthy communities and livelihoods where gun violence is obsolete. Obsolete means not an issue or not happening anymore. So their strategies, they were very politically focused. So they wanted to increase voter registration and turnout. They marched, protested, and advocated for progressive legislation. So this was a really incredible amount of attention was given to this movement when it started, because these were students who were actually younger than most of you probably are, so they were 15, 16, 17, they were high school students. Of course they can't vote yet, but they were knocking on people's doors asking them to vote. Many of the students went to the capital of our country, Washington, D.C., to the office of one of the important legislators, Nancy Pelosi, and they sat in her office until she agreed to have a meeting with them. So this is a combination of advocacy and direct action. So the outcome, this is an issue that they continue to fight for progress on, but they mobilized young people who now, it's been a few years, these are people who are able to vote, and they've really increased the young voter turnout, like 18, 19, 20-year-olds really cared because this was people in their own age saying, you have to vote, like this is about saving people's lives, and they pushed forward the national conversation. Okay, so those were the 4 movements, 3 current, 1 historic in America that I was talking about broadly, and then I'm going to explain mutual aid, which is a type of movement. I was really involved in a project in Boston, where I lived before I came to Kyrgyzstan. So I'll explain what mutual aid is, and then I can talk about the project that I was part of. Okay, so mutual aid. Mutual aid is an alternative anarchic system of organizing instead of traditional nonprofit structures. So nonprofits or NGOs, charity, all sort of similar, not exactly the same, is when a group or an organization has money, they raise money usually, or they activate volunteers to work on an issue, but they have a structure in their organization that says, like, this is our mission, and this is what we want to accomplish, and this is the money that we take every year. They have a budget, but this is a little bit different. This is like, we have a phrase called grassroots, literally grass from the ground coming up from the bottom, and people are not in a formal organization, they're just meeting together and saying, we have a common goal, maybe we don't have much money, or we don't have a structure, but we believe that we can make a difference on our own. So it's horizontal, not vertical, which means like the way that it's organized, instead of saying one person's the boss and they know best, instead it says everybody across the community who's affected by a problem all have something to say about it. Even the people who are facing that problem, they probably know what they need better than someone above them. It's an ethic of care based on the idea that a community can meet its own needs by working collectively, which emphasizes solidarity, not charity. So this means really specifically that it's human-centered. It's not about, it's this idea, instead of having an organization that says, like, we did such a good job, we're the best organization, instead you have a group of people, they're not trying to get credit or trying to get awards, they're just saying, we care about our neighbors, and we're going to find a way for like everyone in our community to get what they need. Okay, so it sounds pretty basic, but you'll see it's a little bit different than traditional charities. Okay, so what does mutual aid look like in action? So these are some examples. Actually, I know that there was also like mutual aid response in Kyrgyzstan to the pandemic, and if any of you have any experience, I'd love to talk about that during the discussion part. But these are just some examples I know from America, from my own community. So hot meal distribution. This could look like something like a soup kitchen, but maybe like meals being given to patients or doctors in hospitals, or to the elderly, bringing food to your neighbors, especially during the pandemic when people couldn't as easily get products and food. Outreach to unhoused neighbors. So this is people who are considered homeless, they live on the streets. It's this idea, mutual aid says like, these are also our neighbors, these people, we can't ignore them, they're part of our community, and they're also, they deserve care and respect and dignity. Mutual aid funds, so maybe this looks like I said, it's funded differently, but a fund is like a large collection or pot of money that's redistributed to the people in the community who need help. So, for example, the neighborhood that I lived in Boston, it was called Brighton. So there was a Brighton Mutual Aid Fund, and people who could afford to donated even just a few dollars. And then when a neighbor had an emergency, the fund could lend them some money or give them some money to say like, oh, you lost your job or your child is sick. We can help you with that because your other neighbors gave even like $5 and now we have enough money to help. It's a direct network of community care. So it's really about getting to know your neighbors and helping each other. Okay. I don't think we need to do this whole slide, but this is just where this theory start. There was a philosopher, a Russian philosopher, who observed biological life, and he found that when animals and humans work together, they can overcome difficult environments. So this is mutually beneficial, and this was opposed to, it's like somehow, in addition to Darwin's theory of evolution, he believed that there was also this mutually beneficial behavior. Instead of just humans or animals competing with each other, sometimes they come together to help each other. And this exists not just in the human world. He was interested in this practice because it was in resistance to authoritarian governments. And he thought that competitive systems as they existed before, in the 19th century and also today, they let some people get ahead while other people are left behind. So his theory was that mutual aid groups could meet all the needs and help everybody get what they needed. Okay. Really quickly, this is a contemporary theorist, so this is Dean Spade. They wrote a book about mutual aid. If you're interested, this is a really good book to read. It's not very long. But there are three main points. Mutual aid serves as a survival tool, and it helps people understand inequity. So it's really about meeting immediate needs and addressing in a community like inequality and inequity between people. It mobilizes participants. This is to create progress, just like all the movements we talked about. And it's not charity because it emphasizes that everybody acts together like in this horizontal structure instead of someone at the top giving directions or orders below. Okay, so why all this talk about mutual aid? So the project I was involved in, was very proud of it. It was a community fridge, part of a community fridge movement. So what we did, this doesn't look like much, but we had these two in my neighborhood in Boston, there were two fridges, refrigerators, that were available for anyone to use at any time. So the way that it worked, we collected food from restaurants at the end of the day, or if someone didn't pick up their order. We also got donations or made purchases from grocery stores, and we filled these fridges with food and products that people needed. So also menstrual products like pads and tampons, soap, Band-Aids, all sorts of things, and lots of fresh vegetables and other food that's hard for people to afford. And anybody could come to this fridge whenever they needed to take food from it, and other people put food in it. So it sounds very basic, but it was actually a lot of work to maintain it because, I'll talk about this more, but we had to be, we wanted the food that was in there to be of high quality because we believed that people who were taking food deserved to have like community care and have good resources. Okay, so these were two that were in our neighborhood, and there was, in the city of Boston, I think there was about 15 fridges like this, but it was a movement across America that started early in the pandemic when many people lost their jobs or didn't have access to fresh food. Okay, so my involvement in the fridge. So this is, it never really, it looked like this for only a few minutes and then people took the food. But this is good, we wanted people to take the food, so I took a picture before it was all gone. But I can just speak from my own experience, so I helped with food rescue. This meant that as a volunteer, I went to restaurants and said, hey, we have this project, if you ever have extra food, could you call us and we'll come pick it up from you. Volunteers with cars, bicycles, or just who love to walk went and brought the food. This was a really important belief for us that quality equals care. So we thought that sometimes there's an attitude that's like, oh, if you need help, you should just take whatever you can get. And we said, no, we believe that all of our neighbors, everyone in our community, deserves to have high quality food because we care about them, we care about each other. And so there was a thermometer in the fridge and the freezer, and 3 times a day, volunteers go to check to make sure that the temperature is low enough for safe food, and they also clean out the fridge. So if we find any food that is open or not labeled or already rotten, we throw that away, and we clean the fridge. We also did outreach and community building. So we had meetings with the community and with people to say, what do you want from the fridge? What would you like to see in the future? To make sure that everyone in our community was as involved as they wanted to be. Onboarding new volunteers, just teaching people about the project so that if they wanted to join the group, they understood some of our basic values or beliefs. I also translated posters. This was really fun for me. I speak Russian, and there's some very cute old Russian babushki who live in my neighborhood. So I wrote the posters in Russian, and then the babushki were like, is this really free? Is there a trick? And I said, no, it's really free. You can come and get what you want. So yeah, that was the community fridge movement, and that's just one type of social movement. And I think there's starting to be some fridges in Europe as well. But it's just an example of my own experience that I wanted to add to say that there's lots of different ways to make social progress or change. And this project is still happening in my city. I'm just here in Bishkek, and the fridge is in Boston. It doesn't come with me. So, okay. I have a few discussion questions, so we can talk about this as a group, and then after that, we will all break up into small groups to plan your own movement or your own social project, volunteer project, so on. So, okay, so right now, these are just discussion questions. So the first one that first off, before we get started, are there any questions about anything I presented on?
No, we got it.
Okay, great. Okay, so do you know about any social movements in Kyrgyzstan?
In our country, actually, a lot of volunteers, I think. Yeah, but like social movements, I don't think there's a lot.
Okay, what kind of volunteerism?
Like a lot of youngsters help people in need to earn money, to pick up the food or something for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool.
I know one movement. It's like support for girls, especially from villages. You know, they just around our country. It's hard for all girls to get quality education, and they just like helping them financial. Maybe they supporting like they chatting together like 24/7. Like if you have some questions, you can always ask, because you know from village. Some people who are like moving from village to cities, they have a lot of problem. I mean, financial problem, or they cannot find something important for them. So it's like your movement. You just if you're female, you can join them. You know, it's a great, I guess, opportunity for all girls here.
Yeah, that's awesome. I haven't heard about that, but that's very important.
Yeah.
Does anyone else want to add something? Babushka adoption. Yeah. Okay, so my next question, what do you think some challenges might be for young people getting involved in social movements?
Like youngsters wouldn't be get like serious for adults. I think like they're young, they're not smart enough to be serious in their movements or something like that. Our mentality.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's definitely a problem. And some of the movements I talked about, like adults in America said like, oh, they're too young, they don't know what they're talking about, especially like the one with the gun violence. They said like they're just high school students, and the high school student said like, but these are our lives, and we're smart enough to know what matters to us. Do you think it would be hard for young people to get involved if their parents didn't support the thing that they were interested in?
Yeah. So in our
how do you think the views of youth might be different than the views of the older generation?
Yeah, it's definitely about our country. Because, you know, Soviet mentality, they still do have some kind of thoughts about it, but actually I see that last years we are progressing in it. Like, I mean, our parents, our grandparents starting to understand that it's very like important. It's okay to help just to be in such communities, and it's not like something funny for them because they think that that's not so serious, you know. I mean, they just getting understand right now, just because a lot of different projects here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
like the word normal in our country exists. Like if you do this, it's not normal for us like that.
Yeah, I'm sure that can be a lot of pressure. Okay, the last discussion question before we start our activity. Do you think young people can change politics? Yes. Woo! They can try.
If there will be support from adults, it will be like you're like it will be elected.
Yeah, it would be possible.
Yeah.
Yes, possible.
The example is Greta Thunberg from Sweden. Do you know her?
Yeah.
I'm sure you know her. Like, no, it's like I see that in Western countries it's common when young people participated in some events, but in all Russia and ex-Soviet countries, just from my knowledge, it is really hard to. We can add something. We can just suggest something, but our old generation they didn't get us like seriously again. Like we are still trying on this way, you know.
Yeah.
I hope it will be soon.
Yeah.
As soon as possible.
I hope so too. Okay. One more time, are there any questions before we start our activity? I'll explain the activity, but questions about social movements?
Are they very popular in the United States?
Um,
Social movements and youth movements?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on the community. The United States is very big and different regions and also different communities have different social and political attitudes. So I think it's more common in urban areas. It's also different causes like are championed by different people. So some people who follow one religion are opposed to a cause, but they might have another cause they care a lot about. So it's not that everyone all agrees, but everyone has their own cause they care about. Okay, so we can get started on our activity. So you are going to plan your own youth movement. Woo! Okay, so working in small groups, we can figure out groups in a minute. So first, identify a social problem you want to address. So that's number 1. 2, state your goal for change or progress. Number 3, plan strategies to reach that goal. And then, so we'll give you some time to work on this, and then at the end, your group will present your ideas the class, what your movement will be. So this is like each movement we talked about, that's why I said like problem, goal, strategies. This is what we're going to do in our activity.
That means that the goal is like the question, what can we do?
Yeah.
And the third plan is how do we do it?
Yeah, exactly. So first the problem, so just for example, just like one more time, so if my problem was, or like the example you gave, the problem is that it's hard for girls from the village to get a quality education. The goal could be to increase their access to education. The strategy could be to offer mentors or partners to welcome them to the city.
Yeah, sure, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Problem of smoke in Mitchel. As we know, smoke is the main problem in our city several years. Yeah. But what causes smoke? There are several reasons. Private sector is where they use gas and the trash to burn their houses. CHP, old cars, city drum, breaking the windows, and this is the windows. It's like the main part of city, and cutting down trees every year, and the number of green is like declining. So our goal is to stop living in inappropriate places and stop deforestation. It's very hard to achieve our goal, but I think the government should be responsible for our air, our lives, and our areas. As we see, small houses are built in the center of the city, and the big houses, like the apartments, are built in the sites, like local apartments. Yeah. But our city is like wall, and the air is not like filtering itself, and it causes smoke and air problems. And we think that builders should know what is windrows.
Hello everybody. Movement is help for homeless. We want to saving this problem. And our goals for the first is providing of temporary home for homeless.
It's good.
Knowledge, give to knowledge, it's providing temporary work, provide rehabilitation, psychology assistance.
It's handicap, it's motion. So, hello
start our presentation with the phrase, every contribution is a help to someone. And we just we took basic and important problems in our country.
Yeah, there are so many problems and we can stop it thanks to the young movement, something like that. And first, it's not just a problem of our country, but it's the global problem. I mean, it's the global warming. Little bit information about global warming. Global warming created with the greenhouse effects when in electric stations, the factories, we use it in developed countries like USA, Russia. They use the coal, natural gas, and all of these evaporates and creates the greenhouse film. And so that's why it's a lot of melting of the glaciers and sinking of the coastal countries. So thanks, I don't know how, but these development countries use all of these factories, but it's hot for us too. So it's very unequal. I mean, that's why we should stop it. Maybe thanks to social media, we can create the group of the guys who can say like America or Russia, let's stop all of these problems, right? Yeah. So.
Waste sorting, container installation, like your example about the fridge. In one city, for example, around Bishkek, we want to take some maybe 15 or 12 containers. There is a sort of papers like for paper, for food. And somehow we will just provide our living waste in our country, you know, because it's a huge problem. We do have beautiful nature, but people just crush everything with trash. And the next problem is about pets, about animals. Unfortunately, we don't have any progressive movement for helping and supporting them. And we just want to combine all people who are who do have pets or want to help them. To create just some easy things like we will have community, we will support them, care about them, and we want to ask our government to provide free vaccination.
A little bit about, especially about the animals. Every day I see the one guy who sitting near the roads, and it's the unemployed guy, but he have a dog. He always sitting on that, and it's very, I don't know, I always wanted to cry when I see it. And when I will be the major guy, I will create the place, especially to animals, because in our country there are a lot of animals without a home and something like that. That's why. And a little bit about our mentality. It's a very huge problem in our country. Maybe we can do the young movement against the mentality. You know? Yeah. So.
It's about these things,
Yeah.
And of course, first is the female support. It means it was one suggestion from our student that he wanted to provide chips protection. The idea is that if you have some problem, you can just click your chip, and the volunteer who is close to you, especially male, can just maybe join you and somehow help you. And it's it's possible for the future, I guess, because it's not so big opportunity right now. And the last page, we just want to add college here. I mean, in college, universities, we should have community movements. They should organize something, and people start to take it seriously and provide events just to raise our community. That's great.
Our youth
It's mainly they are physically interference, but only because they body starts with focus titanic reports, most likely many organs, and already part on our transplanted. Medicine has long proven that focus and person in any quantities is evidence. There are specific results of many studies. These intelligence and concepts and future
there is very common idea in our mentality. It's like what people will say when someone will take step, and this doesn't meet with social standards. We are judged from society, and this doesn't allow some to reveal their potential or talent on something. An example of me, I didn't want to study here. if we, I forgot more. If we just honestly, if we honest, I didn't want to study here. I want to study acting skill, and but my mom say like, dear. What will people say? I think you should do this. And okay. And our teams discuss how to solve this, and we say, and how can this be solved? We should not bind our opinion. And as our teacher says, Murat Beshenich, listen to other opinions, but draw conclusions yourself. Yeah.
For our country, unexpected doctors are sure that much can be each of us. It will change our behavior with such simple decisions like using public transport, cycling, reducing household waste, consuming waste meat, saving electricity, and expanding green space. All of these will lead to reducing emissions of harmful gases into the atmosphere. The main cause of water pollution is human activity. Solutions to the problem lie in the field of cleaning, drains, breath, pollutants into exhaust and ground. To completely solve the problem of water pollution, it is necessary to Thank you for your wonderful ideas. We see that our future is your powerful hands.